entrepreneur turned investor Garry Tan just had the biggest exit of his career. He turned a $330K bet into a $680 million payday. How'd he do it? Keep watching and find out. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Amy Jo Kim, co-founder of the Game Thinking Academy. A few days after the Coinbase IPO, Garry stopped by the Game Thinking Academy to have a private AMA with our students. And in that session, he shared why he believed Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase, was the real deal, what caused him to invest so early, and his smart take on NFTs and the future of investing in cryptocurrencies. Enjoy this glimpse of our amazing session with the startup whisperer of Silicon Valley. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for having me.
We know you run Initialized. We've looked at your background. You just had the biggest exit of your career, but you're also in the middle of working with startups and, making decisions, figuring out how much to get into crypto. Can you just kind of give us a snapshot of what this moment is like for you?
I'm stunned and I have great gratitude. And then all I really want is for this, grand magic to happen a lot more for all of us. How do we get a lot more people to make things for 1 billion people? And then it comes out of directly, a lot of the stuff that Amy Jo has been teaching and working on. How do you help people find product market fit? How do you find what a user actually wants? And if one user wants it, 100 will want it, then 1,000 will want it, then 10,000, then 100,000, then 1 million, then 10 million. And it really does seem to progress that way because it's like unimaginable amount of leverage in being able to write a line of code.
Coinbase exit is in crypto. One of the reasons that you invested is because you saw the need, you felt the need, you were the target market, and then it spread. Now, it took a while. Sometimes it doesn't spread like that. In crypto, it is spreading like that. There's a lot of things about crypto that are hard to understand. There's a lot about crypto that can feel like an MLM or a shell game in terms of the dynamics. There's a lot going on. But crypto is clearly turning into something more legit than when you first invested, when you were at Y Combinator. One of the questions that came in from our community really taps into a question that so many of us have. Many of my clients are currently struggling with NFTs. NFTs are big. They're clearly some kind of bubble, but there's a real long-term value with NFTs. And we're all struggling together to figure out what it is and how to actually build lasting things versus money grabs. Jorge Briones from our community asks, for startups that are involved in mobile games and arts in the creator economy, this emerging creator economy, what are your thoughts on adding NFTs to various products that we produce as an additional revenue source?
I'm not the smartest when it comes to NFTs. I would look to people like Chris Dixon at Andreessen. I sort of link it back to meaning. And then I think, Amy Jo, you have a great concept that's useful here, which is your super fans. The way to think about NFTs is who are the super fans for that thing? And then what drives them is the reason to be for those NFTs. NBA's NFT, that whole universe, that ecosystem, like that comes out of something that maps very directly to something that people really care about, which is trading cards for sports. And then the power from NFTs is actually from the community. Don't focus on the capability. The idea that you can have a trustless ownership of an NFT is merely a capability, but that's like being obsessed about SQL databases, like that's just a mechanism. That's why sometimes I'm a little confused by it. It's like, you don't see people running around being like, I'm really, really excited about bee trees, like how to store data in like a very, in this particular way, right? That's sort of the equivalent of saying like being really into NFTs. I like to focus on what can the user have, just as owning an original Rothko or a Warhol. The value of it is not in like having it in your house. The value of it is like being able to display it and have other people know that you have it. The value is in like the brains of people and in the mimetic desire of that owning and wanting. and being wanted.
Right. And so what I love about what you're saying is how much you're bringing in the importance of mapping it to a real world mental model that you can understand that helps you predict what might happen. My version, from the game design point of view, what can you have? What can you do? Like what can you do with it? And right now, most of what's in NFTs, yeah, there's ways to display it, but it's not very well integrated. So you don't get that like, well, of course you display it, etc. But what people can do now is they can sell it. They can like buy it. And then it's like, oh, here's a marketplace, you can sell it. And if that's the only thing you can do, you're communicating structurally that it's a speculative asset and you should think of it as a speculative asset because that's the only thing you can do versus something else. So I think everyone's trying to figure out what can you do with the NFT.
Yeah, that's right. If you run a game, for instance, that starts to mean something within that community. One of the companies that we funded that's a gaming company where NFTs are at its core is called Skyweaver. So it's Magic the Gathering style online web game that's built on Ethereum. And they were sort of provably rare, like mega cards. By playing it, you can unlock those. That's an example of a dynamic where you need a game with a community, and then the NFTs mean something in that context.
Bingo. Recently, I had another guest, Kevin Werbach, who's a professor of business at Wharton and worked a lot with the FCC in the early internet days with policy at that level. And he said something that blew my mind, which is, if we want not just criminals and underhanded experiments and speculative stuff to happen, but we want really good people doing really good things to be happening on crypto everywhere, it needs to be regulated in some way. And
yeah, that makes sense.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think that was the critical thing that Brian Armstrong recognized very early, which is
tell us more.
He sort of had two big things he had to come to. One was the being converted to Bitcoin and reading the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper. At that point, you go from like normie to fringe, right? And what's funny is like we talk about going from normie to fringe as maybe a bad thing, but when you're trying to create new things, it's actually an amazing thing. So that was sort of the first step. But then even within that fringe, there was an idea that was a self-limiting belief, right? The self-limiting belief in crypto in 2011 and 12 was that crypto and decentralization is anti-government and anti-institution. If you talk to most people, like the most crypto converted today, they still believe that. I don't believe that. What's funny is like he was at Airbnb watching like one of these marketplaces happen, right? And Airbnb itself was secret knowledge, right? This idea that you could sell space on the internet and have like great community and have that be a good solid experience, right? That was still like a heretical weird fringe view. And then that was enabled by regulation and payment technology and anti-fraud. And so it actually makes a lot of sense that it took someone to join a fringe but then also have this other secret knowledge that Airbnb and things like Airbnb are going to take over the world. And then he just sort of synthesized it. And then he was like sort of fringe within fringe at that point. But then he was right. He made BitBank. He started working on the software. He started banging the drum. It's no mistake that he spent a lot of time trying to find co-founders and trying to hire people to come over to his vision because he knew he couldn't build it alone. In a nutshell, like that's sort of a really useful mental model. It's like he had to be fringe within fringe, and then he had to be right. And then now we're sitting at like a $60 billion company, right? On
right.
The
or he had to be able to navigate toward right.
Yeah.
Like Airbnb did, right? Like they were right, but they also made a lot of early pivoting.
Yeah.
So James Young has a question, which is, what framework did you use in your head when you decided to make that investment? James, please introduce yourself and, follow up a little because this is very related.
Yeah, just wanted to understand, like having this idea when it comes to betting on Brian early on, just what are you thinking? Because I want to try to figure out the framework as we're doing social crypto now and what creators and what projects as we're building out our tooling to bet on. Just wanted to really get an understanding of, what you're thinking when you're like, okay, I'm going to just bet on him.
Yeah. first off, there's team. And then I was like, well, this person is a fantastic engineer. I got referred to Brian from Jason Tan at Sif Science. So Sif Science is a really great anti-fraud platform that was growing fast back then. Brian Armstrong at Airbnb was their best customer. And so one of the stories that Jason told me was that Brian Armstrong would stay up until 2 a.m. to debug the anti-fraud platform of a vendor, right? Like Sif Science was a vendor of Airbnb. I'm like, okay, that is like a super good data point for me because I love funding builders who like are legit, right? And the funniest thing is like, I don't think investors use that as a criteria because they can't tell because they never built anything, right? So I look for teams that can really build it. And it's kind of stupid. Like people don't do that, I guess, as much. I mean, I think they're onto it now. So a lot more investors who were builders like do this. And that's why they're so successful. The second is the micro, I think. I'll start with the micro first. Just using the service, it was clean and well lit. A cabinet maker can tell another cabinet maker is good, not by looking at the front, but by looking at the back, right? Like nobody looks at the back except other cabinet makers. So you could tell that there was like thought and effort and good design embedded in what Brian had created even that early when he was alone. The founders are sort of like the mote of dust that is like, that crystallizes the diamond, right? It's like embedded in the founder contains multitudes, right? And it has to start with someone who is that good. And then beyond that, there was the macro. I was like semi-converted in that working for Peter Thiel previously, I had to read The Dollar Crisis. So I sort of, at least like at the macroeconomic level, had a sense that this was a problem. And then back down to the micro level, I had tried to buy Bitcoin because of that macro idea. I was like, oh, this sounds plausible. I don't know if it will really work, but you know, it's free to try it out. And I like to play with like weird things. And I tried to buy it and it was terrible. So, and then that popped me back to the micro, which is like, oh, like this was like how I would build it if I were him. I don't think it was more complicated than that.
Let me just put brackets on what you just said and make sure everybody gets it. Popping between the macro and micro level is a superpower. It's a ninja skill. Like, that's a really important thing. Being able to do that, and it's hard. You can get the bends. Sometimes you can get a team that helps you do that because teams are about asymmetric skills.
Thank you guys. I do have to run, but this, I mean,
Thank you
we
so
need
much.
to do this again. And I really appreciate all the questions. Like your community is the best.
You're the best. We are so grateful. Thank you so much. Have a great day, Gary.
Thank you.
Be well,
Gary.
everyone.
If you like Gary's tips, check out more of Gary's wisdom and learn about our programs at gamethinking.io/Gary.